Thank you so much to all our speakers, and again, thank you, Robin. Sorry to see you go. And but you can stay for a few minutes. You have to leave in right now.
I get all the questions.
Sorry. A couple of questions. Russia has time for a couple of questions, and Colonel Wilkerson can stay and he can handle all the questions, I think, after that talk. So let's go straight to the questions.
Do you think that the United States has a definite policy to help democracy?
Let me repeat that question. He asked, does the United States have a definite policy to encourage democracy in the Middle East? And that's for Russia to say.
So when you asked this question a few years ago, the context in which you asked this question a few years ago, usually the context in which it was asked was people would say, well, you say that you support democracy, but what's going to happen when X, Y, and Z parties come into place? Then all of a sudden you might be saying something else. I think that we've shown that's to be not the case, and that we're working with the governments that are being elected, not supporting any individual candidates, but rather supporting, or any particular party, but supporting a set of principles that we've been articulating. I just respond a little bit to some of the comments that have been made thus far. It is clear that it is a tough world and that there's a lot of challenges. And generally speaking, when you talk about what needs to be done, the Colonel mentioned we need to get out of Iraq, we need to wind down the war in Afghanistan, we need to support the democracies that are forming in the Middle East and North Africa, although it's difficult and it's not an easy process of transition, it never has been historically. Those are the general parameters of what we're following. It's very, it can be simplistic at times to go down the list of issues and say, well, here's what's going wrong here, here's what's going wrong there. But there's also, it needs to be recognized that in many places, the changes that are happening are not, as I said earlier, about the United States, and changes that are taking place, because of the aspirations of people in the region, because of forces that are shaping in the region. And what we need to be focused on in addressing a lot of these challenges, as we've laid them all out, and Robin did as well before she left, is the solutions in addressing some of these challenges. And that's when it becomes tricky, because we generally agree on some of the difficulties that we face, and then when we're talking about the solutions, what I hear generally is, well, we need to be doing more to promote democracy. We need to be doing more to promote economic growth and job creation as the solutions. And if you look at generally the policies that have been implemented, that's the direction in which they're going. It's of course, a topic for debate about what modalities that needs to take, and I'm sure that's what's going to be addressed in many of the panels and sessions in this conference, and that's something that is an ongoing discussion and something that we've been working with many of our partners in this room on. But I think generally speaking, we recognize what the problems are, and we recognize the challenges, and we're not naive about them. We know things are going to be difficult. We know that these processes have taken a long time to take shape, not only abroad, but in our own country. And it's up to us to really come together to figure out what the best ways are that not just the government can support the transitions that are taking place, but also civil society, academia, and other actors.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm David Mack from the Middle East Institute. You are a spectacular example of the American soft power that Colonel Wilkerson was talking about, but I don't want to make it too easy for you. I recently saw a media item from Bahrain in which you were criticized for having met with a certain person and failing to meet with other people. Just for the record, could you tell us with whom you met during your recent visit to Bahrain?
I've been to Bahrain twice recently. We met with a wide range of actors there. Of course, we've met with the government, with the Crown Prince, met with the Foreign Ministry, the Justice Minister, the Interior Minister, met with a wide range of civil society groups, met with leadership of with the opposition, and of course, it's a tense situation there. In our efforts, what we've tried to do, specifically in this last couple of visits, is to meet with a wide range of actors. And what we're trying to promote there as part of my visits is, first of all, we want to make sure that although there are grievances that the people there have, including grievances of some of the groups that you mentioned, all of whom I've met with during at least one of my 2 visits to Bahrain, that we promote the idea that non-violence is the best way to respond. That even though there are grievances that people have, that the national dialogue is the best forum for addressing those grievances. And that's what we've tried to promote with the leadership of the opposition that we met with during our trip in this last meeting with Isa Qasim and the leaders of Wafaq that we met with during this trip and our previous trip. This is part of our ongoing engagement. As I said, it's with a range of actors. It's something that we've been in touch with the Bahraini government about prior to my visit and during my last visit. And I think that it's important that we continue to make the point that while there are grievances that the government is working on addressing as part of its implementation process of the Independent Commission of Inquiry, that all actors refrain from violence in the region. And when religious actors make these types of statements with regard to nonviolence, for the same reasons that I mentioned in the context of talking about the protection of religious minorities, there's a particular resonance. And that's the point that we've been making. And if you look at what happened last Friday, where there was a peaceful sit-in, in some of the news reports I've read, it's been clear that there was no violence or very few reports of violence that took place this last Friday. And in fact, there was peaceful sit-ins in response to some recent events there, and that's what we've been trying to promote with all actors in the country. And I don't think that message is anything that anyone can disagree with. It's difficult. Finally, I'll say that every single time you go to meet with every single group, but the group that you mentioned was one that we had met with in our previous visit. We want to make sure that we're talking about it.
Thank you so much.
This is to the previous advisor to the Chief of Staff. It is the impression in the Arab world that the United States wants to do the right thing, but it is impotent to do that. Because when it comes to the Middle East, there is nothing that can be done that Israel does not approve of and condone of. And at the present time, Israel, in spite of all of the difficulties that you enumerated, is in a very good position. It goes around with one hand holding the atomic bomb and the other hand holds the United States. Can do whatever it wants. Is this impression correct, sir?
And it's so correct that I recently went back and did a great deal of study on my own in Madison, Jefferson, and Monroe's attempt to undermine George Washington's, principally his second term, with regard to France. You may recall that in Adams' term that followed that, his single term, we actually had the Alien and Sedition Acts, and we had a really draconian government. That's what forced Washington to say what he said when he talked about being aligned with any particular nation in the world. And when you look at how close that came to derailing the experiment that then the United States was, and that depended so deeply on Washington's protocol and precedent and so forth, I think you understand why Washington said what he said, and you understand how dangerous it is to allow another nation, any nation, to dictate policy to another nation. Dangerous for both nations, I would contend. In that regard, I don't agree with you that the Israeli position, though, is tantamount to being, holding the bomb in one hand and the U.S. in the other hand. I don't think that's a tenable position. I think what we're looking at is the potential failure of the Jewish experiment in the Middle East. And there are a lot of people who, of course, would applaud that. You're right in the sense that no one's going to push Israel into the sea, because whoever tried, their capitals would disappear before Israel slipped into the sea. That's a rather existential confrontation we don't want to see happen. But the only way to stop that in its tracks is to stop this ridiculous 50-year failure we have now. And I shouldn't say 50-year, because there were actually some American presidents trying 20 or 30 years ago. No president has tried since H.W. Bush. We need to get a handle on and a solution to that's believable by both sides in the region, all three sides, Palestinians, Arabs, and Israelis, to the Arab-Israeli, Palestinian-Israeli situation. We've got to do that. The two-state solution business now, when I talk about that with people, they laugh at me. Whether they're from the region or not, they laugh at me. That's it. George Mitchell. Even when Powell was trying to resurrect the process, it was dead. It was absolutely moribund. It was moribund because George W. Bush and Ariel Sharon wanted it to be moribund. And it hasn't been resurrected ever since, despite complaints to the contrary or protests to the contrary. It needs to be resurrected, and it needs to be accomplished. And it needs to be accomplished in a way that gives both people a place to live that is viable, has economic prospects, and looks like it could sustain itself. Otherwise, we're going to have this problem, and this problem is going to lead to more and more and more. That's my assessment of the situation.
Follow up on this.
A very brief follow-up.
And how can it be accomplished, given the political realities of the United States?
It takes, as I've said about closing Guantanamo, a lesser issue, as I've said about other issues, it takes moral courage on the part of the President of the United States to speak like a man to the Prime Minister of Israel. That's what it takes. I go all across this country speaking to American Jews. I am convinced 70% of American Jews, as J Street and its activities recently have begun to reflect, are for a peace settlement and would not object to an American president who strong-armed that peace settlement into being. And yet we still have people like AIPAC and others who are the ultra-right wing of that Jewish community holding us at bay. This is nonsense. It takes a president with political and moral courage to break it.
Thank you, and unfortunately, we are running, as always, late. We can, if you have just a very, very quick question.
No.
Very, very quick question. Okay, I scared you off, and that's one of my strengths, is scaring people. I think we can now take a break and reconvene downstairs for the rest of our program at 2:30. And from 2:30 on, we will be the ZUP on time.